Welcome to One on One with Mitch, Lafon, and joining me on this episode, it is former Tiger of Pan Tang's bassist Richard "Rocky" Laws. We talk about the history of the band, working with John Sykes, his feelings of what the band is doing now, going on with the name, and a lot more. Before checking that out, please head over to Twitter and check me out at Mitch Lafon, MITCHLAFON. And should you care to support the podcast, please maybe send a little donation to paypal.me/Mitch Lafon. And with that, here is the one, the only, Rocky Laws. We are speaking with Richard "Rocky" Laws, formerly of Tygers of Pan Tang. Pleasure to speak with you, Richard.
Hi, Mitch. Yeah, good to speak to you.
And I'm assuming it's been probably a few years since somebody actually referred to you as Rocky, right?
Well, actually, my sister still calls me Rocky, strangely, which is the only one who does. But yeah, absolutely. No, I haven't been Rocky for quite a long time.
Quite a long time. So
yeah.
Let's talk about sort of the Tygers of Pan Tang and the history, but let's start with now. What are you doing these days? Are you still at all involved in the music industry on any level?
Yes, absolutely. I've worked in the music industry for years. I'm a lawyer in the music industry, so I've been doing that for more than 25 years now. When the band finished, that's what I did. I went and studied law and became a lawyer.
Is it corporate law or is it copyright law? What kind of sort of?
Well, it's music law. It's record contracts, publishing contracts, merchandising, stuff like that. Mostly, I act for companies rather than artists these days. So it's not really artist based, but it's I'm the enemy of the artists, I guess, because I'm acting for the companies that sign them, the record companies and the merchandising companies. But so that's what I've been doing for many years now.
That's actually interesting. Is the music business as much trouble as everybody likes to claim, where record contracts don't mean anything anymore and you don't get signed to a label anymore? Or do you not see that at all doing what you do?
Well, it's changed a lot. I mean, the problems are not exaggerated. It's changed dramatically. I mean, when I was in the Tigers, the situation was that you made money from recording, and you played live to promote the recordings. And playing live was a very expensive thing to do, and generally speaking, you lost money doing it. Whereas these days, there's not much money in recordings anymore, and people make money playing live, but you have to have a record out for a promoter to book you on a tour. So it's kind of completely flipped round. And of course, the internet has had a dramatic effect on record sales. And the kind of money that's made from streaming is nothing like it used to be in the old days with CDs. When I first started working in the music business as a lawyer, it was just at that sort of boom time when CDs came out, and essentially the industry was getting everybody to buy their entire record collections a second time. That was a real sort of golden age for the industry. But for streaming, especially if you're signed through a record company, you're getting quite a small percentage of quite a small amount of money for each play. It's quite difficult, I think, for artists these days. But there are other opportunities. There is money in other things. People have to sort of diversify. There's a lot more money in things like having your music used in films and adverts, and there is a lot more ways that music is used now than there used to be. But it's a more sophisticated, more complex business. But yeah, I'd say it's probably harder to make good money as an artist these days than it used to be.
Yeah, and diversification is important. And I'll get to the Tigers in a second. But is streaming really that much of an enemy in a sense? when you go on Spotify, I'll go listen to bands that I probably wouldn't spend $10 on, and then I discover stuff, and at the same time, they get that stream, and it's sort of the same money as AM and FM radio was paying back in the day, except now you don't have to have somebody put you on a playlist. The fan can choose to visit you. I mean, it's sort of it's like the modern day radio in a sense, right?
Well, of course, if you look at it as the modern day radio, then it's not such a bad thing. But I don't think radio used to take away from sales, whereas obviously streaming does. People now stream instead of buying something. And I think at the top end, artists who would sell a lot of records that will have a lot of streams, and especially those that actually, don't go through a record company and do it themselves, they can still make a lot of money through streaming. But I think at the lower end, at the end where you wouldn't be selling that many records, in the days where a CD would sell for sort of, the wholesale price anyway would be sort of $7.99 or something. The artist could get £1 a CD or something like that, or maybe more. It would take an awful lot of plays to make that £1, or dollar or whatever. But where if you were only going to sell a few thousand records anyway, you'll make nothing from streaming, whereas you would have made something from selling records. I think that's the difference. At the top end, somebody like Adele is still going to make an awful lot of money. But I think for the people who sort of struggle more at the other end, I think it's harder for them.
Yeah. I just see it sort of on the positive that on the low end, somebody might discover you, and then you might get that ad stream or that movie stream or that that other opportunity, whereas you may not in the past. And if you're on the lower end, MCA might not have put your CD out back in 1985, but now that you can sort of dump it on the anyway.
Well, it's certainly easier to get your music to the public. There are companies now that you can sign up to, and they will put your music on iTunes and Spotify and everything, and even if only friends and family are going to buy it, you can still have it up there, and of course it's up to you to then go out and market it and create the demand for it. That is really the role of a record company. Is really, it's the marketing is what they do. Actually, putting music out there now has never been easier. But I think as a band, it's not difficult to get noticed. It never has been, and it isn't now. I think some people, in fact, their problem is they get noticed too quickly before they're ready and get dismissed as not being something that the industry would be interested in, and then there's kind of no way back from that. But
that's a great point, by the way. You get out there and you put a YouTube video in. You look back in the old days when you think of Aerosmith or Kiss and all that, even Bon Jovi, they didn't get famous to their third album, most of them, and they had that time to develop. Now, somebody sits in their basement, puts together a video, throws it up on YouTube, and of course everybody looks at it and goes, well, what was that? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's lead that into Tygers of Pan Tang. The early days when you were working to get a record deal. Jess Cox, the vocalist at that time, gave you sort of a punk vibe, if you want. But yet you got lumped into the sort of new wave of British heavy metal. What was the band trying to be? Were you more sort of Sex Pistol-ish, or were you more what was Iron Maiden doing and what those bands were doing of that new wave?
Well, we weren't trying to be anything. We what we sort of were was just sort of what came out. It's really the punk thing. I don't think really probably came particularly from Jess. Rob had been in a punk band. Brian was very keen on punk music, and I was quite a fan of punk as well. We all liked sort of heavy rock, and but we liked punk too. I mean, I've always just liked anything with guitars, really. I'm not, I was never sort of tied to any particular genre as long as it had guitars in it. But I think when we got together, it was sort of an amalgam of just the things that we were into and just our sound. I mean, it just kind of came out. The first time that Rob, Brian, and me played together, we just straight away, it was just like we knew there was something interesting there. It was just you kind of just knew straight away, but it didn't really sound like anybody else. It just was what it was, and there was a sort of punk thing there. I mean, the punk thing as well, I think, came from we were fairly limited in our musical ability, to be honest, and I think that was there was a lot of the sort of punk ethos was to, you just got out there and played. It didn't really matter whether you'd sort of spent 10 years perfecting your musicianship. You just got out there and played, and that was kind of what we did. You sort of learnt on the job, so to speak. You just got out and played and hoped for the best. So I think we were kind of working with those limitations, really. And there was the sort of punk influence, the limitations, everything else just created that sound. And we didn't even really sort of think, oh, let's get together a heavy metal band or anything. It was just like, let's play together and see what happens. And I didn't even necessarily think anything would come of it. I mean, when I persuaded Brian to come and jam with Rob, I mean, it was, I didn't know whether they'd like each other or play well together or anything. It just, I'd never been in a band. It was the first time I'd ever played in a band situation. The first time the three of us played together, that was the first time I'd ever played with anybody. So, I really didn't know what to expect. But it just kind of, we knew straight away that it was something. And so, yeah, and thought, well, yeah, we'll try, get a singer and take it from there. And I can't really remember how the first singer we had, I can't remember how we got him, but he looked and sounded like Geddy Lee. And, we did about 25 shows with that first singer. It was, I think he kind of wasn't as committed to it as the rest of us were, so he left at that point. But, we wrote quite a lot of songs at that stage. It was we were giving it a go. But yeah, it was kind of what it was. We didn't sort of, it wasn't deliberately, we weren't trying to be a particular kind of band. Although I suppose you've got to think in terms of the choice of cover songs that you did, and those were they were all sort of rock songs. There would be Ted Nugent, AC/DC. We did a reasonably convincing version of Bastille Day by Rush, given that the singer looked and sounded like Geddy Lee. But so it was that kind of thing. We didn't play any punk stuff, but it was all rock. But yeah, and then when the sort of second version of the band got going, I mean, we think of Jess as a founding member because that was the version of the band that first recorded. So he really, we think of him as a founding member, but he wasn't the original singer. And yeah, I can't remember the question now, but that was how we kind of got going.
No, yeah, and it's funny because as you were talking, I'm trying. In my mind, I had set up that I was going to go through the albums separately, but looking at it from your perspective today, as the job that you have in the role that you have today, what are some of the mistakes you saw that Tygers were making now? Looking back, you say, man, we could have survived a little bit longer had we not done this and had we done that instead.
Well, the thing is, a lot of it's not in your own hands, or at least it's not, there are circumstances which arise that you don't really have a lot of control over. I mean, one of the sort of crucial sort of strange things that happened was that after Spellbound, we were supposed to do a live album. That was what we were going to do. And we recorded a live album. It did eventually come out about 20 years later, but we got a mobile studio, came out to record a gig. We were all except John Sykes, we were all very ill, and we just sort of we'd started the tour, and we hadn't kind of learned to pace ourselves really. I mean, when we toured at that point, there was a lot of partying and everything, and so we all got really ill. We got a really bad flu, but we did the gig, and when you're on stage, the adrenaline takes over, and you feel okay. When you get off stage again, we felt terrible. I mean, we were dying in the dressing room. And sort of half an hour later, John Sykes comes in and says, I've listened back to the stuff we've recorded, and it's unusable. And strangely, it was never mentioned again, It was just like, oh, okay. And I think we just felt so awful anyway that we just didn't give it any more thought. And it was really a bizarre thing because, I mean, a lot of live albums aren't really even live, They're either repaired in the studio to the point where, I know of at least one live album that was recorded entirely in the studio. And so, why it was just kind of abandoned. And I never heard it, until it actually was released on an album 20 years later, I'd never heard it. And it was, when it did come out, you could see, in fact, actually, it was more than usable. It was perfectly fine. And if there had been anything wrong with it, it would have been an easy thing to put right. I think probably John had just heard a bad note or something, and, being a bit of a perfectionist, he probably thought, this is no good. So as a result of not putting out the live album, we were sort of had to record Crazy Nights way before we were ready. And it was, that was the reason. There's some good stuff on it. It's kind of half of a good album, really. But in terms of the sort of organisation of it and putting it together, it was a shambles. And because of that, we didn't want to repeat that when we came to do The Cage. And so we got a pop producer in, really. I mean, he's sort of a rock producer these days, but we were the first rock band he'd ever done. And, because we didn't want a repetition of the same sort of craziness that went on at Crazy Nights. We were ready to sort of really try and work hard and, put a professional sort of operation together. And so, that though all of those things were kind of crucial developments in the band, but none of them were deliberate. I don't really think. Another example would be when we got John Sykes in the band. I mean, we put an advert in. I can't remember where, but advertised for a guitar player. And of course, when you've got a record deal, everybody wants to play in your band, and so all of these really good guitar players turned up. And, didn't really occur to us not to just pick the best guy, and John Sykes was the best guy. But, of course, it radically changed the band. If we'd kind of known how it would change the band, who knows, maybe we wouldn't have even picked him, I don't know, because we weren't looking to do that. It was what we were actually looking to do was just sort of fill out the sound, because Wildcat was recorded, with two guitars. So Rob did rhythm and lead. So, when it came to touring it, we really needed two guitars. So that was what we got another guitar player in. We didn't really think in terms of getting in a world-class lead guitar player. But that's what we got, and it did sort of change the sound of the band. So these things, I don't think you really necessarily, they're not necessarily mistakes, but they things happen that are not really within your control, and it's.
So if we can look at some of this stuff, then Wildcats. I'm gonna go back in time. So Wildcats comes out, and it has sort of a modicum of success. It creates a fan base, but the media, from what I've researched all the different reviews, they took a lot of shots at the vocals. They said, "Oh well, the vocals. Oh well, the vocals." So you get John Devlin in for Spellbound. Where was that decision made? Is that the story that's out in the public is that Jess quit. Did he quit? Was the record company saying, "Hey, you need a more radio-friendly voice"? Where does that decision come in?
Well, the record company weren't even involved. I mean,
Okay.
we didn't used to discuss anything with them. We were, they were the principal sort of object of our derision, really. So we never talked to them about these decisions. I mean, we didn't talk to them about the decision of getting John Sykes in either. I mean, they were horrified. They didn't like the idea of having two guitars. They liked it when they heard it, but they didn't like the idea of it. And we didn't discuss anything to do with vocalists. I mean, it was, as I say, getting John Sykes in the band radically changed the sound of the band. I mean, we became a much more conventional sounding band. I mean, the sort of limitations we'd worked with in the sort of Wildcat era was, led to something that was unusual and that didn't really sound like anybody else. But, with two guitars, and especially with sort of John Sykes' abilities, it was a more conventional band. It was a more conventional sound. I mean, a better band in most ways, I guess, but it was definitely, a more sort of mainstream kind of sound. And I think really it kind of didn't suit Jess, really. It didn't suit his voice. If you listen to Spellbound, it would be hard to imagine, really, Jess singing Mirror or something like that, But, I mean, now I think it would have been interesting to have done an album with John Sykes and with Jess. I think it would have been an interesting thing, but, it wasn't to be. I think, I mean, that was it. It was really getting John Sykes in the band. It was the catalyst, really, for that change, I would say.
Looking back at John Sykes, because, he is, now 2016, 2017 here, we considered to be one of these great guitarists, revered, the stuff with Thin Lizzy and Whitesnake. Was he just the wrong guy for the band? Because he sort of did up the sound and up the guitars, and was he maybe just not the right piece of the puzzle?
Oh no! I mean, I think we were delighted with the Spellbound sound. I mean,
yeah, it's a great album.
What I mean is, we hadn't really been intending to do that. Getting John Sykes in wasn't in order to change the sound in that direction. We never thought about what direction we were going in. I mean, there was no thought of that at all. It was just, we had all of these great guitar players auditioning, and he was the best, and so we picked him. And so then suddenly you find yourself in a band with, there's five of you, and one is able to play world-class lead guitar, and that pulls you in a certain direction. It's not a kind of deliberate thing, but I think, I mean, when we got John Devlin in the band, which again, I mean, we auditioned for a singer, and we didn't have in mind any particular kind of singer. We weren't thinking, do we want somebody with a soul sort of voice, or do we want somebody with an operatic voice or anything? We just auditioned, and he was the best singer, and so he got the job. We weren't really kind of thinking about. One thing about the Tygers is it's never had a kind of guiding sort of influence the way Maiden has. I mean, Steve Harris decides how Maiden sounds, and so Maiden has sounded fairly much the same throughout its life, because it's got that sort of, he is in charge, it's his band, and he decides how it's going to sound, whereas the Tygers never had that. We were always, everybody was equal, everybody had equal say, and, really just whatever came out, came out. So when we got John Devlin in and we did the demos for Spellbound, I mean, I was amazed. I mean, I got home from the studio doing the demo recording, put the recordings on. And I just couldn't believe how amazing it was. For me, it was like, wow, I can't believe I'm in this band. It was great. So, yeah, there was no regrets at that point, because it just seemed like, and I think for most people, I suppose there's two classic Tygers albums, and one is Wildcat and one is Spellbound, and they're very different. But, I suppose both of those versions of the band are sort of classic versions, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
I was just going to say 4 albums in 2 years.
Yeah.
Was that record company saying, hey, let's get some product out there, or were you guys just so eager to get going that you wanted to create? Because you look at it now, 4 albums is, for any band now, is a decade, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it was madness. I mean, Wildcat and Spellbound happened fairly quickly in a fairly natural way. And as I say, we were supposed to fill the gap after Spellbound with a live album, and that was going to give us time to work on a third album. But because that didn't happen, we were doing Crazy Nights. So the record company, yeah, they were mad for, they were always saying, oh, can you do another album? And it was like, we were always dependent on finance from them, and it always seemed to be dependent on another album coming out. So yeah, that was we certainly weren't ready for Crazy Nights, and we weren't happy about having to do it when we did, because we hadn't written much. It was, and the way it was recorded, because we hadn't really written it. And the producer, is that we got the wrong producer, really, I guess, was part of the problem. I mean, that was a wrong decision. But the way he liked to work was he liked to record the bass and drums at the beginning, and then add the guitars, and then add the vocals. And so, because the songs hadn't been really written, Brian and I were playing the bass and drums to songs that we'd never heard. It's kind of like a bizarre way of doing it. We'd never heard these songs as songs, because they didn't have any vocals, they didn't have any words. I think maybe a couple of them did, but a lot of them were just sort of, it was just, there was a guide guitar, but Brian and I were kind of playing the bass and drums to songs we'd never heard, which was kind of bizarre, really. So, if we'd had a chance, we never demoed that album. I mean, the others we demoed, but that one we never demoed, and we were straight in the studio, and and it was pretty shambolic, really. The other thing was we were just, we were partying pretty hard at that point, and I think we'd kind of taken our eye off the ball, really, as far as what really is important in being a band, and we were treating what are the sort of ancillary things as being what it was all about. And that's kind of what we tried to put right on the Cage, really, was, I think we'd all realised that that kind of stuff can't go on. And I mean, yeah, we thought it was hilarious to kind of, to get the producer drunk, He'd get so drunk we'd have to send him home in a taxi, and then we couldn't record anything for the rest of the session, It was just sort of ridiculous things like that, absolutely crazy behaviour, really. But, we weren't really ready to do it. It was just, the whole thing was just shambolic. And we were very disappointed with the result, really.
Yeah, so I've got a whole bunch of questions here. So, first of all, the sound from Wildcat all the way to the Cage varies differently. Like I said, one is more sort of that punk ethos, which is Wildcat, and by the time you get to the Cage, it really almost sounds like sort of a rocked out Duran Duran in a sense. And I don't mean that to be offensive. I like the Cage. I happen to actually enjoy that album, but if you think back to 1983, 1984, or in fact this was 82, it sort of seems to be following along that, the Knack and sort of those more glitz, fun rock, if you want. Was that sound a mistake for the band? Because did it, in one sense, it reaches radio, but on the other sense, on the other hand, it sort of alienates the metal fans, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was watching an interview with James Hetfield, and he was talking about when they did Load, and he said, we got arrested by the heavy metal police for not being heavy metal enough. And that's kind of like, it's a bit like that. But of course, we actually got away with it for many years. I mean, before we were brought to justice for it. Because at the time, it was a great success. I mean, I don't remember at the time anybody going, "Oh, this isn't heavy metal enough." I mean, it was our most successful album by far. It was the most successful tour. So, people were buying it, and people were coming to see us, having bought it and listened to it. We had a fairly high up the bill gig at Reading Festival, which went down really well. I mean, now you hear people say, well, it's soft rock and all the rest of it, but at the time, that really wasn't happening. I mean, at the time, it was clearly, yes, it was a bit of a change of direction, and it was the only time we actually made a decision to go in a particular direction, and that was to go in a more commercial direction. That was definitely a decision that was made. I mean, that was made whilst John Sykes was still in the band. And The Cage would have been a similar album even if he'd still been in the band. Two of the tracks were recorded with him still in the band, so I mean he was up for that as well. So I mean we decided to do a more commercial album. I mean exactly how it was going to be, we didn't know. I mean it was a very different sort of approach. We got a producer who was sort of had done a lot of pop, and suddenly it was like, well, you had to submit songs, and they were going to be compared to some cover songs that were also in there, and you weren't necessarily going to get your songs on the album. I mean, every song had to compete to get on the album. So it was a very different thing. We played to a click track. I mean, it was very regimented. It was, and to be honest, after what we'd been through, it was great to do it, And now, I see on YouTube comments like, "Oh, this was they went really off the ball here." But yeah, I don't remember it at the time. It didn't feel like it at the time. It seemed like nobody in the band certainly was in any way not up for it, and it was great fun to do. Yeah. I don't think we would have carried on in that direction. I think it was probably a one-off, but it was. Yeah, I don't remember. It was. I think it's a good album. I mean, it's not my favourite Tygers album by any stretch of the imagination, and I think there are things about it which date it now in a way that isn't good. I don't like the electronic drums on some of it. I think they really sound very sort of 80s.
Well, it really does. The electronic drums give you that 80s flavor. But listen, Lonely at the Top, Paris by Air, I mean, those to me are classic Tiger songs. And of course, Love Potion number 9, but I love those ones. So the album comes out, and you say you have this successful tour, and it's very successful. And of course, Love Potion number 9 has success over in the States and in Canada. Why was the band not able to establish themselves in North America? Because really, you're not Ozzy Osbourne until you're Ozzy Osbourne at Madison Square Garden. You're not, Def Leppard until you're Def Leppard at the LA Coliseum and stuff. Why could the Tygers not make that move? You had the songs.
Yeah, well, we thought that finally we might actually get to go to America. Having made that album, we thought, well, that's got to be suitable really for the American market. It wasn't necessarily sort of specifically targeted at that. It was deliberately commercial, but it wasn't deliberately American. but we did think, having made it, that we might finally persuade MCA to send us there. But with them, it was like they always sort of thought, well, when you get the record sales, you can go. And we would always say, well, you don't get the record sales until you go. You need to be out there promoting it. And but I think a lot of it had to do with, as I say, in those days, it cost money to tour. And to tour America cost a lot of money. And, I think they probably wanted to see some more commercial success with the recordings before they were prepared to invest that money. And
was
and
MCA was MCA the right label for the band? Because MCA wasn't, you look back historically, they're not really a hard rock label, right?
Well, at the time that we signed to them, we were happy to be on a major label. I mean, whether they were the right label or not, I think, there were problems with them. They were largely the sort of UK office of an American label. We were actually signed to the American label, not to the UK label. The UK label didn't sign acts. They were kind of like a sort of UK office that what they were used to doing was, sorting out stuff for American bands when they came over here. It was a bit of a new departure for them to start signing things, really. So, there were some issues. They didn't have, when we first signed to them, they didn't really have a sort of great press department or any of that. But I don't really, if you say, well, would it have been better not to have signed to MCA? Well, then, who would we have signed to? You've got to sort of think in terms of what the alternative would have been.
Atlantic, Capitol.
Yeah, but I mean, none of those people offered us a deal at the time.
True.
It was very much it was a bit of a sort of scramble. You had, I think, was it Vertigo signed Def Leppard, which I think they're a Universal label. EMI signed Maiden. And then there was a bit of a scramble for sort of other labels who were interested in it to sign some of the other bands who were around. And that's how we came to sign to MCA. But, all of the major record labels were not interested particularly in new wave of British heavy metal at the time. Some of them were and some of them weren't. It wasn't really, it wasn't a feeding frenzy of labels wanting to sign us. I mean, we didn't have it wasn't a bidding war to sign the Tygers. In fact, we actually were signed to Neat Records, really, and we originally got signed to MCA through Neat Records, not directly. And it took a bit of doing to get rid of Neat, to be honest, out of the picture.
Neat has the first singles and so on and so forth. The Cage comes out and it does well, and then the band breaks up, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm skipping a step in there, but there was no next album, at least not from this lineup. What happens there? Why was there not a 1983 album?
Yeah, well, it kind of all went pear-shaped, really. It's, because it's difficult to overemphasize how well it was going, and not just in terms of, the profile of the band and everything, but I mean, that lineup, the tour, the Cage tour, was a great thing to do. The band was a great band to be in. We were. Fred Purser was a really good musician, and he, we kind of were. The rest of us had learned. We'd had a couple of years of doing this. We'd sort of played bigger and bigger gigs. It was a much more professional band, and it was very tight, and we all got on very well. I think we were a pretty difficult bunch of people, really. I mean, the original four and all the people who joined, I think. We were all quite difficult people. We could sort of have an argument in an empty room, most of us, and we argued a lot. And, that there were times when it was quite unpleasant. But that time actually wasn't. But the issue really was that we didn't want to do Cage 2, and MCA did want us to do Cage 2. In fact, they wanted really, they had got it into their heads that because of the success of Love Potion No. 9, that wouldn't it be a great idea to do a load of metal versions of soul classics? That's kind of that was the way they were thinking, and we just wouldn't do it. So, that's where we were with MCA. They were basically saying we will only put any money into this if you basically make the Cage again, but even more so, we want more soul classics metalled up,
Which is a weird request when you think about it.
Very weird request, but considering the success we'd had, you could understand where they were coming from. But we didn't want to do it, and they wouldn't put any money in if we didn't do it, and it got to really quite an impasse. We had recorded a fifth album on demo, but it was all written by Fred. It's another one of those situations where, it wasn't really that long since the Cage had come out. I think we were all sort of feeling a bit, in the writing department, I think, we were all feeling a bit of a loss of confidence because, some people hadn't managed to get any songs on the Cage. And so suddenly it was like, it's not another album again, it's a sort of fifth album, God. And, it was like Fred sort of, he said, I've written an album. So it was like, okay, we'll do your stuff then, I don't think it's the only time that's ever happened in a band. I think when Pink Floyd did The Wall, it was like, right, who's written anything? And Roger Waters had written 2 concept albums and the rest hadn't written a song between them, And we were in a bit of that sort of situation. He'd written an album and we hadn't written anything. So we demoed his songs, and we had like this little 4-track machine, and it's really funny now to think that that's how somebody might demo an album when you think of what you can do just on a computer. But we had this little 4-track machine, but we did like a proper demo with live drums and everything. We set the drums up in my bedroom. We got all of the mattresses from all over the house and packed them against the walls, and we made another bedroom the control room, and we bounced all the tracks down. Fred was sort of doing all of this stuff with this little 4-track. He was really good at that kind of thing, and he kind of sort of, it was almost like he'd taken over really. He was kind of at that point definitely the major creative force in the band. So we demoed this album, and we couldn't agree anything with MCA, so we thought, well, let's try and get another record label. And we went around, and lots of them were interested. People like EMI were interested, but what they were going to have to do was
buy you out. Yeah.
To buy us out of MCA, yeah. And nobody was interested enough to both buy us out and invest the money that was needed to push the project forward. So it kind of stagnated a bit, and we were sort of really not knowing what to do. And we'd sort of been around a lot of, at the same time, well, to cut a long story short, at the end of the Cage tour, we'd parted company with our management. And so we looked around for new managers and everything. But, we kind of just couldn't move it forward because we couldn't get away from MCA, and MCA wouldn't do anything unless we did what they wanted. So we were just a bit stuck, and the next thing to happen was that a manager came along who knew our agent, and he said, well, I can get you a record deal, but not if Brian and Rob are in the band. And, it was a terrible thing. I know.
Why Brian, though? Brian's a good drummer.
Well, Well, do you know, I mean, the bizarre thing was what they said was that you know, the other three of us were tall, and Brian and Rob weren't tall enough. Can you believe that? I mean, it's mad.
Well, you know, believe it or not, I can believe that, because back then, Image has always been very, very upfront in the music business, right? It's
yeah.
That's you know, you look at Alice Cooper and Kiss were doing, and David Bowie, they all image.
Yeah.
So the band breaks up. I guess the legal play now would have been to just call it something else and not call it the Tygers and start again, but that would have been complicated.
Well, not really, because you're signed not just as the Tygers, you're signed to MCA as people. So, you know, we were actually, at the time, you know, stuck in this contract as people. We couldn't, I mean, even splitting up, technically, you couldn't have gone and recorded with somebody, you know, with somebody else, because you were exclusively signed to MCA. So there was no kind of escaping that. We were stuck with that. It was still always going to be a question of buying us out of MCA, but this guy said he thought he could. But the fact is, you know, nothing came of it. I mean, it was a terrible thing to sort of tell Brian and Rob, and probably I should be ashamed of myself for having anything to do with it. But you know, but it seemed like there was no way out, you know. So we kind of went a bit down that, but I could see pretty quickly that nothing was going to happen. This guy got more and more difficult to contact, and, you know, it was clearly it was all a load of rubbish, and nothing was going to happen at all. So, I mean, you know, nothing, the band never played without Brian and Rob, so it's not like, you know, the band carried on without them or anything. Nothing ever came of it. So I just decided I didn't want to carry on, and you know, I had other things I wanted to do. You know, I neglected my education at that point, so I wanted to go and study. And also, you know, you kind of realize that everything you're doing, it's like your livelihood. You know, it's how you make a living, and it's all dependent on other people all the time. And I wanted to do something that was just dependent on me, and you know, that I wasn't going to find other people's decisions, you know, getting in the way. So that's kind of how I ended up leaving it all, and really didn't really give it another thought for many years after that.
So let me ask you this: as a young man at the time, you must have been what, 24, 25? You couldn't have been that old, right?
Yeah, that's probably about that. Yeah.
Was it disappointing that you couldn't be sort of the rock star, or was it a relief and you look back on it now and go, you know what, I did damn well? You know, was there a sense of disappointment or a sense of relief at that time? Like, okay, we're done. Now let me go do this education. Let me go be a lawyer, a solicitor, I guess you call it.
Yeah.
So disappointment or relief at that point?
Well, it's as it was happening, it was very upsetting. I mean, it was really awful. It was awful to just see, you know, as you said. I mean, you know, we were in our most successful period. You know, the album it charted higher than any of the other albums. You know, we'd been to Japan. You know, things were really going well, and you know, to see that fall apart in very quickly. I mean, you know, it really sort of happened quite only in a few months, really, after the end of the Cage tour. You know, I think that there's a YouTube of, we did a UK TV show called The Tube, and I think that might well have been the last time we actually ever played together. And so, yeah, I mean, it was awful, and the whole thing about, you know, sort of with Brian and Rob, I mean, they were the people I started the band with and everything. It was just awful, you know. So that was just horrible. But then I guess once I decided that I really needed to go and do something else, I didn't spend a lot of time sort of worrying about it or thinking about it. It just seemed like the right thing to do.
As you look back on it now, it probably is a great relief, because sort of the rock and roll lifestyle compared to what you're doing, with family and everything settled down, and you probably actually ended up having it better off in the long run.
Well, it would have been. It would have been great if it had all just sort of happened, and we'd been sort of Metallica or something, and all ended up sort of rich and famous, and lasting success and everything. That would have been great, and I would have enjoyed that, I'm sure. I mean, by the time we came to do the Cage, I was teetotal. I didn't drink at all by then. I had problems with that, and I, so I think I probably was. I think I would have probably at that point survived the rock and roll lifestyle, because I think I kind of had already got over that. But as it was, I mean, these things just. I definitely, looking back on it now, I mean, I think I was lucky that it happened the way it did, and life's been good, and I'm glad I did it. It was a fun thing to do, and it would have been great if more had come of it. But you see so many bands. So many bands never even get a record out. To have 4 albums on a major label. To have gone to Japan, toured Europe and the UK. Shame never to have gone to America, but but all the things that we did do, I sort of think of as really good things, and I think a lot of the music was stuff that we can be proud of, and
I agree.
I certainly over the years, it's amazing now to sort of think, that Rob's still doing it and that Jess is still doing it. Which is great. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I went to see Rob's version of the Tygers a couple of years ago, I think it was, and they were really good. And I've seen the YouTube clips of Jess, and it's a pretty authentic sort of Wildcat sound. I think it's all a good thing. Well, whether I could still do it, I don't know. I don't think there'll ever be any kind of reunion.
Well, we have done a lot of time here, so I thank you for that. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a couple of questions here. Yeah. In '85, John and Brian come back with an album called The Wreckage, which was under the Tygers name. First of all, was that somewhat surprising? You broke up, MCA wouldn't let you out of your contract, yada yada yada. And then here they come with this new album. Were you shocked, surprised, annoyed, angry, happy for them? Baffled?
Well, none of those things, I'd say. I was at university doing my degree, and I walked into the living room, or the sort of place I was living, and some of the other people in the flat in the apartment had the TV on, and there's the Tygers of Pan Tang, John and Brian playing, and it was like, oh, really? But I certainly wasn't angry or anything. I was surprised, I guess, but no, I wasn't angry at all. I think with bands, if nobody's using the name, then people can pick it up and run with it, and if somebody drops the ball, somebody else can pick it up and run with it. I wouldn't have expected to be asked or anything. It's not like that, is it? It's a terrible shame if the brand, if you want to call it, that's probably a horrible word, but if that's going to waste, right? I think I'd rather there was a band going called the Tygers of Pan Tang. I'm amazed that all those years ago when I sort of thought of the name, because when I thought of the name, there wasn't even a band to call the Tygers of Pan Tang. To think that there's still a band called the Tygers of Pan Tang is pretty amazing. And so John and Brian were doing it. I didn't sort of think really think much of it at all, really. But I suppose if I had thought about it, I would have thought it's probably a good thing. I haven't really heard those albums much. Certainly never sort of sat down and listened to them. But I certainly no objection to them having done it. No, not at all.
Yeah, and brand is not a bad word. Brand over band any day. That's the way I look at it. which is why Kiss has been so successful.
Yeah.
1999, the Wacken Festival, or Wacken as I guess they call it, calls you up and says, or calls Jess up or Rob up and say, come with the Tigers, get all the guys, get Brian, get Rocky, let's do this. And according to both Rob and Jess, you decline, which seems to be the case because the show went on and you weren't there. Why did you decline? Why would you not go back for a one-off and just say, okay, let's go shake our, tuchus for 45 minutes and excite the fans?
Because nobody asked me. I mean, that's obviously the first reason. I didn't even know anything about it.
Okay.
I don't know why nobody asked me, but they didn't. I don't think I would have done it anyway. I mean, my job's not the sort of thing where you can just sort of suddenly, go and concentrate on something else for a while. I had 2 days off last year. It's not. I haven't got the time to do the rehearsals, and you can't just get up. I mean, there was a point a few years ago where I think when the Tigers bass player left, and Rob rang me and asked me if I wanted to do it. But not necessarily to sort of join, but did I want to do the couple of gigs that I had lined up, and I couldn't do it. I mean, it's so long since I played that stuff that the idea of just sort of getting up there and playing it, you can't do that. You've got to rehearse and everything, and you've got to learn it again. It's sort of, it's 35 years or something, since I played any of that. I've got the albums, but for many years I didn't have any of the albums even. So, it's not something that you can just suddenly do. It takes a bit of time. I mean, I wouldn't do it unless you could do it properly. I wasn't asked, and even if I had been asked, I don't think I would have done it.
And well, with the 40th anniversaries of Wildcat and Spellbound and all that coming up, hopefully you'll get together and do a one-off with the boys, because I think that would be fun for the fans. And then lastly, John Devlin, he's gone on to be a stage actor and does all kinds of wonderful things over in the UK. Were you surprised that he turned to stage acting, and how did you rate him in terms of being a singer?
I thought he was a great singer. I mean, I even more so when I came to sort of listen to it again after, as I say, I kind of just really didn't think about any of it at all, or listen to it or think about it at all for maybe 20 years or something. It was really only, I suppose, social media and things that started to sort of, and then I kind of had a sort of attacks of nostalgia, I suppose. But then listening to it again, I think especially there was a bootleg of the Reading gig, and I once I got back in touch with John, I messaged him to say, I was just really knocked out by how good he was. I didn't even remember. I thought he was good at the time, but I didn't remember him as that good. So yeah, he was a really, really good singer. And being an actor doesn't surprise me. He was a very dramatic sort of singer. He was a very dramatic sort of guy. So no, that doesn't surprise me at all. I think maybe that would have always been his preference had he had the choice between, singing in a band and acting. He probably would have always wanted to act. So no, that doesn't surprise me. And I thought he was an excellent singer.
Yeah, he really was.
We were very lucky to get him. I mean.
Yeah, he was over in Persian Risk, and then I guess came on over. Now the live album you've been referring to is the Nottingham, or it came out as Nottingham Rock City. I've got to say that is one of my favorite live albums out of all of them, because having done these interviews and all, I know that a lot of them have been touched up in the studio, but that one, there's an energy to it, and yeah, there are mistakes on it, absolutely, but they add to the charm of the whole presentation. And the version of Mirror on that album, it really just is what Mirror should be. It's sort of the perfect dirty love rock ballad, whatever you want to call it, it just works. And folks should definitely seek that out and pick it up. And
it's my favourite Tygers album, that one, actually. Because I mean, for me, a band is what it is live. It's not the studio albums, really. I think, a band lives and breathes what it is like live, and that's the important thing. And that is what you say about Mirror is quite interesting, because listening to that Mirror on that album, I think, that's actually, we did that pretty well. But at the time, we thought it stank live, and we dropped it as quickly as we possibly could. We hated playing it live. I don't know why, but it always seemed to be too slow. But actually, when listening to it on that album, it's actually just right. But it always, I suppose, because the rest of the stuff was kind of like 100 mile an hour. Our manager used to say, we used to sort of race each other to the end of the song. But that one, always on stage, felt like a dirge. It felt far too slow. And it was, it kind of just didn't feel right live. But I think it's a shame we didn't hear ourselves play it, really, because I think we could have carried on playing it. I mean, you've always got to do some sort of slowish song in the set, but
it has to be properly paced, and anyway, I just love the way that it's delivered. There's a sense of drama to it on that album. It just, when I make a playlist and I go to put that on, I usually try to put studio albums on because you don't want live in your headphones, but I always have to go to that version. That version just, it is the version. We said 20 minutes, we're an hour. I could go on for another 2 hours, but I'll finish with this. You mentioned that you saw Rob and Tygers going on. Their new album, which is simply called Tygers of Pan Tang, was my choice for best album in 2016. Yeah. I don't get a sense that you're disappointed or annoyed that he's gone on with it. In fact, I get a sense that you're happy that he's carried on sort of the name and the what do you want to call it, the heritage of the band.
Definitely, yeah. Because, I put a lot of hard work into it, I mean, it's not just something that suddenly happened. He's been doing this for something like 15 years, even this lineup of the band, well, maybe not, because I think the guitarist's quite new, but, most of those guys have been in the band longer than I was. I'm glad somebody's doing it, I mean, if it's not me, then I think it only matters to you if somebody else is using the name, if you want to use it yourself, really, or if you think what they're doing stinks, but it definitely doesn't stink, I mean, it's really good. I don't sit there and compare it to the original band or anything. I mean, I don't see how you can, really. It's sort of, you're talking about two things 35 or 40 years apart. But it's definitely good. And so, I'm glad he's doing it. But I'm also glad that Jess is out there doing what he's doing. I certainly I think the thing is, for me, I've got nothing to be bitter about the band. I've got nothing to look back on other than be happy with it all, because it certainly, everything panned out. At the time, it was all good for me, and it's all been good for me since. So, it's not, none of it's a problem, really. And I wish all the guys the best, it's, and we went through sort of tough things together, all of that. It's a long time ago. There's a lot of water under the bridge. Or, we had a lot of arguments. We didn't get on a lot of the time, but that's all history. It doesn't matter anymore. It's too long ago. Some people maybe can't get over it, but it's I'm happy with it all.
Yeah, and that's for me, it's refreshing to hear, because I hear a lot of rock star stories where, well, he shouldn't have done that, and blah, 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 and it's bad, and it's my brand, and my merchandise, and it's always somebody's complaining, and it's nice to hear somebody say, you know what, good for him. Glad to hear that he's still carrying on the name, and it's all good. So thank you, and thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you as well. I'm really happy that people are still interested, and I think I'm getting the impression people are more interested than they've ever been, and that's great. It's really good just for people to be interested in it, and people appreciate what we did all this time afterwards. It's amazing, really.
Yeah, and I think everything sort of comes in cycles, and I think we're sort of going back to those early 80s years with, especially, with all the sort of celebrities that are passing away in 2016. We're sort of looking back and going, man, we had it good back then. Let's not forget this stuff. And, Tigers...
But, as well, it's kind of like, it's a sort of, it's a bit of a jumping off point, I think, for bands like Metallica. And I have to say, that nobody has been better at sort of giving a nod to where they came from than Metallica have, A lot of people sort of say they're not as good as they used to be and stuff like that. But, I mean, in terms of, what they've done for the new wave of British heavy metal, they've been fantastic. They're all constantly mentioning it. You see James Hetfield in a Tigers t-shirt and stuff. They've been great for it. And, it's good. You now see festivals and, there's bands that sort of I used to go and see in pubs in Newcastle playing. There's people like Raven and Fist and people like that. They were actually before I even was in the Tigers. I used to go and see those bands in the pubs in Newcastle, and they're still going and everything. And there's this interest in the new wave of British heavy metal, and
and a lot of that is like you said, it's all Lars Ulrich. Just ask Brian Tadler and Diamond Head how important Metallica has been to their career. I think it's
absolutely, and it's just not many people do that. Not many people take the time to actually say, these were the bands that we listened to, and this is where it came from, and to still be bigging it up now, is I really appreciate that they do that.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you for your time. Absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Good to talk to you.
Thank you then. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye now.
Bye, Mitch.
And there you have it, folks. My interview with Richard Rocky Laws, formerly of the Tygers of Pan Tang. Thank you for checking that out. And please check me out on Twitter at Mitch Lafon, MITCHLAFON, paypal.me/Mitch Lafon, should you care to support the podcast. And if you would like to know what the Tygers of Pan Tang are currently up to, head over to Tygers with a Y of pantang.com. And with that, I bid you a fond farewell. Thank you for listening. Au revoir, arrivederci, sayonara, and whatever else you say in whatever else language you might speak. Bye for now. Oh my.